co-founder of the Black Mental Health Alliance, Senator Shirley Nathan-Pulliam. Senator Nathan-Pulliam. Let's hoop it up for Senator Nathan-Pulliam. I always feel so special when she's around because if she sees me, she zones in on me, and no matter where she is, she always mentions the Black Mental Health Alliance. She introduces me, and people look at me like, you know her? I'm like, yeah, I do. I'm excited. So Senator Shirley Nathan-Pulliam is going to bring us remarks on behalf of District 44.
I'll use this. Thank you. It is the Negro tragedy I feel which binds me like a heavy iron chain. It's the Negro wound I want to heal because I know the keenness of its pain. Only a thorn-crowned Negro and no white can write my book of what the Negro people ought to brook. Or statesmen roam to set things right. This Negro laughs and pray to God for light. Good morning. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Maryland General Assembly and my colleagues in the Senate. I am just blown away. I am excited about, of course, the topic. And just to think that so many of you came out this morning for this summit. It tells me that there's a tremendous need. And Jan and the board and Richard and all of you, it's timely, and thank you. Thank you very much. Because our community, in this time of Trumpism, they no longer hide how they feel. It is blatant. It comes right out, and you know that racism is alive and well. And it's impacting our children, and I can listen to Dr. Newton as she spoke, and how it impacts our children. We know that in Baltimore City, I represent Baltimore County and Baltimore City. But in Baltimore City, we have a high rate of violence, which impacts our children. According to the Harvard study, it impacts the cortex of the brain. And therefore, those children do not learn in the way that we want them to learn. And then we wonder why they get angry and why all the problems exist. So we have much work to do. Tremendous work. I also serve on the Joint Committee on Oversight Committee on Children, Youth, and Family. So there's a tremendous need. But let me tell you real quick about this past session. I put forward legislation on health in all policy. And that legislation did pass, was signed by the governor last week. Oh no, it was May 4th it was signed. But there was another one that I really wanted because I thought it was vital to what's happening. But I guess I'll be putting it back in next year. It's called Reconciliation and Equity, the Conversation on Race. There's a tremendous need for us to have this conversation because one-sided, we can't deal with it, not alone. We have to come together to be able to deal with it, to have that conversation. And unfortunately, I'd asked Morgan State University to convene it because when the department says we don't have anybody to convene it, I always go outside and look, like I found the University of Maryland Center for Health Equity to convene the one on health in all policy. And I did the same with Morgan. However, the attorney says because there's a lawsuit with Morgan and the HBCUs and the state that they were afraid that my legislation would impact it. I haven't seen how it would, but that's what they say. So therefore the bill did not go. So I will be busy looking for another convener so that we can move forward with what needs to happen. We need this conversation. It did pass the Senate last year, but it didn't pass the House. And this year, it never got out of committee because of what was said. So I just wanted to say that I'm happy to see so many of you. The information that's being shared today is very vital. And I remember, I think it was 1985, when Max Colley and myself convened for one similar to this, their first summit. It was at the whole Providence Hospital just before it became Liberty Medical Center. We had it over in the conference room, and we talked about the mental health and bridging the gap and all of the issues that impact. And it was just about the same time that Margaret Eckler task force findings came out with, that spoke to the number of blacks who died, the morbidity and the mortality rate of blacks. And we in Maryland also did a study at the same time. It was headed by then Senator Young, and I was on the mental health task force of black mental health. And what we did again, we talked about the issues and how it impacts, because you can't talk about health without saying mental health, because it's one. If you're physically ill, there's something mentally going on at the same time, and vice versa. So we really have to look at the whole person, and that's what you're here today, to look at the whole person. So I can look around the room and see so many faces, and I don't even want to start calling any names because I'll be going on and on. But it's wonderful to see you. I just wanted to say, I think there was something else that I wanted to say to you. I think those are notes I was taking from your presentation. The notes that I was taking, but I also had written down something that I wanted to say to you. I know what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that we've been talking about this issue for a long time. It was in 1895 when Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois at the Atlantic Expedition talked about the deficiency in healthcare. And if you fast forward it to 2017, listen, he was talking about the deficiencies. You remove the word deficiencies and put disparities. We haven't come that far. We're still talking about the same issue. So it is very serious. We've got to make a difference in our children's lives and those lives of us. And we cannot be good to anybody else unless we're good to ourselves. And as I take my seat, I remember at one Black Mental Health Conference, a woman came up and testified. And she said, you know, my white friends know that I have a mental health issue and that I have to see a psychiatrist, but my black friends don't. Because again, we continue to think there's a stigma and we should not address this issue. All of us at one time or another have some mental health issue going on. And one of the things while I was putting forth the bill on reconciliation and equity, I had 14 different people from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene that came to me about depression, came to me about heart disease, came to me about all the things you talk about, doctor, about the things that impacts. And they were all people that felt that they should have had a promotion, that they were taught down to, that they never got what they needed to move them up into the system. And because of that kind of racism, I did go to the governor and ask for a commission to begin to look at racism, but it never happened. That was under O'Malley. It didn't happen. And here we are again, still trying to get it done. Because all of those people, all 40, except 10 of them, it's only 4 of them that did not report that they had major illness after being beaten down for so long. So it affects us in every way of our lives. Again, have a wonderful, wonderful day. My chief of staff is sitting over there. There's a young man, he graduates on Saturday. On my birthday on Saturday, he graduates from Morgan. And I'm so proud to have a young African-American male that I'm training and giving him all of the insight as to what's happening in Annapolis and in the world. I thank you.
Y'all look so good. In traditional African societies, we ask permission from our elders before we speak. So I'm not looking at anybody in particular, but do I have permission to speak? Thank you. So Hotep, Habarigani, Jambo, I'm happy to be here. Before we get started, I just want to say this. The first time I heard about Karsonya and Jera was in April of 2015. Excuse me. And Charlene Phipps, who is my partner in crime in terms of doing emotional emancipation circles, she works with me with students at Matthew Henson Elementary School. And every second Saturday, we take on an issue. And on April the 11th, 2015, it was about health. And Charlene found Karsonya and Jera, and so we said, okay, that's going to be the theme for it. So on that day, we talked about wellness, physical, social, mental, emotional. And we talked about how, in terms of safety, if the police stop you, you know, what you should do. We talked about longevity in life, that if you take care of yourself, that you can expect to live a long time. But if you do things that are not so healthy, premature death. And the students understood that. And we said, well, this is how we feel about it. Go home and ask your parents about it. That was April the 11th, Saturday. April the 12th, Freddie Gray was arrested. And a week later, he was dead. You know, we talked to them about, again, it goes against the laws of nature for parents to bury their children. That's not supposed to happen. And so that's why this kind of resonates with me. So we all know that this panel discussion is about two important, let me just say this. Jan asked me she called me and asked me, could I be the moderator? And I said no, but yes came out of my mouth. Because I really would rather be out there, you know, I wanted to be out there with you all. And so, I did say no, but you heard yes, right, Jan? Okay. So she didn't tell me which panel, but then I looked at the panel, I said, hey, I know somebody on all three panels, so that's, you know, made it easier. So anyway, so I said yes. So I'm not gonna read all of their bios. You all know that this panel discussion about too important to fail tools to reroute or reroute the pipeline. And our presenters are Dr. Andre Bundley, who is Director of Alternative Option Programs and Schools at Baltimore City Public Schools. I'm Dr. Kay Wise Whitehead, who is an author, Associate Professor at Loyola University of Maryland. And Dr. Lisa Williams, who is Executive Director of Equity and Cultural Proficiency for the Baltimore County Public School System. I'm not going to read their bios because y'all can do that because that'll just give them time to do what they need to say. So I'm going to start with Dr.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Good morning, everybody. I am honored to have been asked to come. The contact person was my big brother, the person who was a role model for me, Richard Rowe. So I really just appreciate you. When we were down, that's right, give him a hand. When I was down deep, steeped in that hood, I was able to look at that television and see you, black man, on that television, being able to just speak truth to power. And I said, I want to be like that. And so that role modeling piece is important. Dr. Newton, just thank you. You, Asa Hilliard, so many of you, Naeem, helped close the circle in my mind. Was able to come from, again, the Whitelock Street, and mother dying at 13, lived in foster care, kinship care, went through the whirlwind, but it was wholesome knowledge. It was truth that made me whole, that helped me to become whole. And so the question this morning is, how are our children? Our children are fine. When are we going to raise our level of expertise to deal with them where they are and deal with this new normal? I find so many of us blaming our children for the condition in which we find them. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And these are those with degrees, with PhDs and MEDs and behind their name. But we continue to blame our children because we choose not to come up with solutions. It's the craziest thing. My son wears eyeglasses, and I never once took him to the eye doctor when he was young, and the doctor said, you have weak eyes. Blamed him for the condition in which they found him. No, he didn't. He started at his baseline and worked from his baseline in terms of where he is. And so that's what we have to do today. It is very clear to me, having been, and my lens is having been a youngster in Baltimore City Public Schools, graduated from Baltimore City Schools where they were still focusing on graduation rates and not learning rates, right? And then coming through this city, coming through sleeping next to a brother who was a convicted armed robber. He always says to me, even today, he said, Andre, isn't that amazing? We grew up on Whitelock Street. We slept in the same room. You graduated from Penn State, and I graduated from the state pen. We were in the same space. But the place is what are we going to do what needs to happen for our children? So Dr. Newton and others have already spoken about the knowledge, but the application of the knowledge is not translating. How do we know it's not translating? I don't want to do a whole bunch of analysis because I've since moved from being a cultural analyst to a cultural worker, right? And as a cultural worker, we're putting in work. So you got to put in much work as the individual who is hustling and putting in work to try to go get your child and bring him or her to his side. You got to put in an equal or greater amount of work. So here's what we know. Here's what we know. We know that, when I walked in, Dr. Newton was covering this. We know about our powerful history. And our history should psychologically and emotionally propel us. But they don't know their history. And many of the educators, and I must say this, because I'm a part of that group, I've never seen those who are supposed to bring individuals forth. That's the Latin root of education, to bring forth, to push forth, not read enough information that's going to help us do what we need to do. Like the youngster told me out of Philly when I was at Penn State, he said, brother, you real smooth with them words. He said, but I haven't seen you talk about or heard you talk about our cultural history. He gave me a reading list, and he was younger than I was. See, our history, if our children don't know what happened in Kemet, if they don't know Nubia, if they don't know West Africa, if they don't know that they are strong merely because they came through the Middle Passages, shame on us if we're educators. Shame on us if we're psychologists, because that information propels you. That is very important. So we know in history there always have to be a history, and we have to put that history, take that history and apply it to a cultural context. But also, when you look at where our children are right now, the history, just giving them their history won't be enough. So when I go down in that hood on that corner with that individual that's playing the 50s, that youngster that's in school, what I mean by playing the 50s, he is selling drugs, right? But he's also coming to school every day trying to graduate. He's playing the 50 for economic reasons, but he's trying to come full circle because you can't live in a capitalistic society without any capital. Tell me if you're going to be all right when you go pick up your check and they tell you it's not there. Right? So we have to bring that full circle. So we give them their history, but we also got to understand their state of being. So we understand that state of their being, that state of mind. So when we're educating right now, and let me just pause and say this. I just believe, now that I've spent 31 years, I beat them, because they tried to get me too. In Baltimore City Public Schools, I can speak truth to power. I'm free. I done been here. They tried to get me too. All I've ever done is love children, but I ran to be the mayor of their city, and they said, you didn't ask for our permission. But when I understood who I was, I didn't have to ask for permission. See, because I understood about losing 100 million people in the Middle Passages. I knew that I was strong because if I made it on this side, on these shores, then I was strong anyway. But our children, that will propel them if you teach them that as well. You got to let them understand what they talk them, and no disrespect, because the Jews will never let you forget the Holocaust. But a Holocaust is just a word meaning total destruction. But so when you talk about the Middle Passages, that's all you're talking about. 100 million people with sharks following ships that were disguised as cruise ships. And individuals laying in one position. and made it anyway. So now if the children know that story, they know that story, then now that you help them with their state of mind. But if in fact he is in a bad capital situation, money situation, you got to help him with that too. So that's another piece that we have to, when we talk about education, so everything, you got to understand the history of where our children are. You got the history, you got to know their cultural history and help them understand their cultural history based on where they are starting out. All you're doing, if you're not teaching anything, when I was the principal at Walbrook, I used to say, if the teachers have taught and the children haven't learned, did the teachers really teach? If the leaders have led and nobody's following, they say anybody who believes that they're a leader and they look behind them and then there are no followers, you're just taking a lonely walk. Nobody's following you if you don't understand who you are and whose you are. Not even our children. So that cultural sense, that understanding of who you are, but also the education of our children is so important. And sometimes when you operate in systems, they put you on and fast track you to something, or fast track our children to something and promote them right into a brick wall. What am I talking about? If you look across the country, they give superintendents, excuse me, they give superintendents raises because of graduation rates. It's a bonus. Children the graduating with diplomas can't read, can't write, can't compute, because we have bought into graduation rates, when in fact, as parents, we're not into graduation rates. We want graduation, but we want it by way of learning. So we got to push for learning rates. So we have to start youngsters right there where they are. See, because they allow us and they ask us to do it in every other sense. When a youngster when they feel that one of our children who is in the same hood can play basketball, he or she is tall, they support them through their level of awkwardness. They support them all the way through. They become their agents. They become their managers. Since the beginning of time, if somebody could hit a note, soon as they found out you could sing, you'll get a manager. They will support you through your level of awkwardness. Our children are coming from situations where their parents haven't been taught. So the only thing, you live what you learn and you learn what you live. So if I don't know nothing, I only can give you nothing. So what happened is, so now we don't have a process, and the process he's put together that where we're talking to both parent and child. See, I'm just saying, we just have to change how we're doing business. And we have to be bold enough to do that. And listen, I understand we got to pay rent and you pay mortgage and we send our children to school and all of that stuff. But the fact of the matter is, when you sign up to educate, please educate. Don't play with the lives of our children. What is the emotional state of our children? We know what the emotional state of our children is. So what I'm saying is that we now have to have leaders that can do the right thing within structures. So I talk about my life, but when I look at me, I have a long-term memory about how I've gotten to this point and have not forgotten. So if you're in a structure, now you have the first thing that sets up, if you're in a structure, then there has to be positivity in that structure. You got to build quality connected relationships. I remember when individuals say something good to you, say something about you, your endorphins start kicking. You feel good. You get goose pimples, right? Our children believe anybody that cannot treat me right cannot teach me right. If you have some kind of model where you're trying to meet with our children and they don't feel you, they telling you, I don't feel them. If they can't feel you, how are they going to tell you their story? If they can't trust you, why would they tell you about their life? Why would they tell you about something that you're going through and you're going to take that information, go home with your family, and have a conversation about them across the dinner table? Why would they do that? So we got to build quality connected relationships with our children. That is the first thing that we have to do as we are entering into this process. How are the children are fine? But when are we going to take all of this knowledge? If cities are not changing, and as people of African descent, and really that's all of us, because Africa is the cradle of civilization. So all of us from Africa. And those of us who think you're European and European country, if you don't understand that, and if you're offended by that, don't be mad at me, just go read the history. So we all tied together. We have chosen to be apart, right? So if we have all of this information, it should translate and work in the so-called worst spaces. See, so when I was a principal of a school, right, I always said when I was able to run for mayor, they said, well, how are you able to run for mayor? Because my school was still moving. And my school was moving because my children knew I loved the hell out of them. Any hell that they brought, I loved it out of them. And so I could go do that. And so what we got to do is create structures with the right things within the structure. So we got quality connected relationships. We're not lying to our children. When we give them the assessments, we help them to get a baseline of where they are, and we do the same thing that the rapper does. The same thing that the basketball player does. See, they do the same thing. The method doesn't change. If you want to be a great shooter, put up shots. If you want to be a good singer, just sing. And you got to help individuals understand, and let me know when I started, because I don't want to go over the time. I'm going to be respectful of the time. All right? 5 minutes? All right, just tell me, okay. All right, so thanks, Jan. So what it's like, if you look at Steph Curry, he puts up shots. They're supporting him through his awkwardness. So when our children get their baseline, just put up reading shots. Stay with them. All you got to do is support them while they just putting up them reading shots, while they putting up that math problem shot. It's the same thing. It's the same concept. Listen, you don't even really need your PhD to do this. You got to have some will and passion to do this. When they recruit our children weren't born gang members and drive-by shoot. They weren't born like that. Right? So the fact of the matter is nobody, because of the ones, think about this. How about the child that hung with this child in his neighborhood? I got Damon back there. Damon grew up in the same neighborhood. Damon knows what we were experiencing down at Whitelock Street. We've seen bodies drop, but how is he here? He was here because of a structure. Inside that structure, somebody tapped his heart and his mind, and they put something on his mind and gave him a pathway where he could see himself forward. It's simple. All we had to do that for our other children. One lady was talking about the youngsters who they can't focus and this, that, and the other. Well, that ain't all our children. You know, when I go into prisons and when speak down at 954 Forest Street, hey, trust me, they are very focused. They intentionally went into pharmaceutical sales. They intentionally went into pharmaceutical sales. And there's nothing wrong with their ability to focus. And make certain that their 20s and their 5s and all of that are turned and flipped the right way so they can kick it out. Ain't nothing wrong. But I'm saying we get so intelligent, we start blaming the children for the condition in which we find them. It's your fault. But you know what? And I close with this. My mother died when I was 13. And when my mother died, my sister was handling our business as a family. And I never heard them say, you know, mommy has stage 1 cancer, stage 2 cancer, 3, 4. They had no stages. But the pink movement, the people who persevered, now you got stages of cancer. You got treatment for cancer. And you got women and men beating the hell out of cancer. Because the medical practitioners didn't blame the individuals for having cancer. So when are we going to stop blaming these families and children for the condition in which we find them? So I'm saying, I'm just ready to put in some work. That's all I've ever do. I'm just a cultural worker. I don't do a whole bunch of talking. Where I grew up, you had to fight anyway. So I'm just a fighter, right? I just want to fight. As a matter of fact, when we were growing up, it's unfortunate. They say when you see a good fight, just get in it. So I'm saying the children are fine, Dr. Gill. Mark Booker, the children are fine. David, the children are fine. When are we going to raise our level of expertise in which we find them? Stop. You got PhDs, you got MEDs, you got all of that stuff. If it's not translating, then it's on us. It's on us, and it has to translate. We got the knowledge, we have the information, and I thank God in my spaces where I was that, you know, children come up to me today and they don't want to smack the hell out of me. Excuse me, I forgot I was at New Shiloh. I was in the community room, though, I'm sorry. But I just said hell because, you know, that's what happens. You got hell in you, you got to get that hell out you. So I'm just saying, we are in a great place. And the last thing is this. our children are in pain. So whoever brings about the pain release, because we are comfort seekers, right? Pleasure seekers and pain avoiders. We seek comfort and avoid pain. So those of you who can meet our children to help release that pressure of pain, you're going to be a star in their lives anyway. You know that. You know that. So we're in a great shape right now. But if you're scared of our children, you can't educate them. If you don't want to be near our children, that's the thing. And I got to say this, because I work at North Avenue now, and I've never seen so many busy people walking around with laptops and walking around, and our children. And listen, you got to stop playing. If we want to do this thing, get in proximity to the person you're trying to help. You can't remotely help them. Thank you.
All the time. He would knock me in the head going, are you listening and do you hear me? Because every time you walk out the door, your actions show me that you missed something that I said. You may have processed it, but you did not implement it in your own lives. So thinking about our children, I beg to differ just a little bit with Dr. Bundley and his work. I don't think the children are fine. I'm working with too many mothers who are crying. I'm working with too many fathers who are dying inside. I'm working with too many families who are suffering to believe that their children are fine. We have to recognize that our children are not doing well, and when they're not doing well, you call in people to help them. I, too, dealt with cancer with my mother-in-law, and she had stage 4 cancer. We found out at the last minute, but we became aggressive. We called in radiologists. We called in doctors. We did the research. We said, you are not fine, and our job is to figure out how to get you well. I see the same thing with our children. They are not doing fine. Have you been to a public school lately? When you walk into the building and there are bars on the wall, there are no doors on the bathroom stalls, there's no toilet tissue in the bathroom, you can't tell me that that's fine. Those are the conditions that I would never want to be in. That is not fine. We're doing a disservice to our children because we are allowing this to happen. We're sitting back and we're watching them take down generation after generation. And we're doing, in so many ways, the best that we think we can, but our best sometimes simply is not good enough. I'm a former Baltimore City teacher, and I came down from New York, and I remember walking into the school. I had this vision of what was going to greet me. I said, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to be greeted by children in blue linen and white T-shirts. They're going to have apples for me and call me Mrs. Whitehead. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for coming to teach us. I had this vision of Baltimore City. They placed me in the most persistently dangerous middle school in the city. And I walked in the first day and they took my bags of prisoners at the door, like we were going into something we shouldn't be in. I broke up fights on my way to my class. It wasn't even 8 a.m. yet. Nobody thanked me for coming. Nobody was in blue linen, and nobody bought me an apple. But I greeted my students that day. I said, good morning, geniuses. It's a pleasure to teach you. And my principal, who is one of the busy people now down at North Avenue carrying a laptop, said to me, these are not geniuses. You're teaching students that are below grade level. And I said, they may not be geniuses today, but they will be when I get finished with them. Because our job is to save every child. So for those of us who enter into this work, like I do, we have multiple consciousness. I'm not just entering into it as a researcher, thinking about what's happening in the black community. I'm entering into it as a mother, knowing that if I can't use my work to save my own sons, to make sure my boys can get home safely, to not have to stay up every night and cry tears because they're late calling in, then what good are the degrees if they don't do that kind of work? So what I was reflecting on as I kind of go into what I'm thinking about here, as I thought a lot about Baltimore City, you know, a racist and divided city, sitting in the hole of a racist and divided state, on the edges of a racist and divided country, and recognize it is not America at war that scares me. It's America as war against the black body that keeps me up at night. Because every part of this system is working to keep us in a state where we are not fine. whether it's living in food deserts, going to school in unsafe conditions, catching the buses where you're going to be afraid for your life. These are unsafe conditions designed to keep us in a state of sickness. We are not fine. For those of us who mother black children, we do so through a sea of violence, through a sea of trauma, and through a sea that is raging with the storms of injustice and inequality, of systemic and embedded racism. And we understand that we are now bound in a country that does not respect us or respect us as people, does not respect our voice, does not respect the very air that we breathe. We know that because we live in a system where we can be gunned down at any moment. And we cannot expect to ever receive justice. They get upset because we get angry, because you can shoot our boys in the head with rifles like we are in another country, and we should not be upset. We should accept this because everything is fine if we just keep doing what we're doing. That's not fine. That is not okay. I was thinking also about what this means for our children in school. We're thinking about ways to disrupt what they call the classroom to prison pipeline. What does it actually mean? When I spoke to my father this morning, because I typically speak to my father before I go and speak, I know you have to get permissions from the elders to be able to speak in a crowd. I call my daddy. I'm like, Daddy, I need permission to speak. He says, as he always does, stop calling me. You're wasting time on my cell phone. What do you need permission from me to speak? I sent you off to college with an empty box. He said, in that empty box, I put all the tears that I shed when we didn't have money to pay the bills. I put all the dreams of everybody who came through this family line. You don't need my permission to speak. I educated you. You should be fine. So I thank him for that, but I recognize and understand that at this moment in this country, we're living with the fact that black folks now constitute nearly 1 million of the total 2.3 million people that are incarcerated. Black folks are incarcerated nearly 6 times the rate of white people in this country. When you put black and brown folks together, we make up 58% of all the prisoners, even though we make up only 1/4 of the population. If black and brown people were incarcerated at the same rate as white people, prison and jails, the population would decline by 50%. That's what we call the new Jim Crow. That's the educational industrial complex leading our children into the new Jim Crow. 1 in 6 black men have been incarcerated as of 2014. And if current trends continue, 1 in 3 black males born today can expect to spend time in prison during his lifetime. 1 in 100 African American women are in prison. And nationwide, as it pertains to our children, we represent 26% of juvenile arrest. 44% of black youth are detained, 46% of them are waived to the criminal court, and 58% of young black people under the age of 18 for a juvenile crime, they are admitted to state prisons. Some of these factors we know, things like city crime, things like what's happening in the inner city. We know about drug use and this so-called war on drugs policy, using those terrorist terms to talk about a serious condition. We know about the 3 strikes rule. Anybody who's lived through Reaganomics understands the impact of government policies on our communities, how Reagan set up to gut our communities and Clinton came along and helped them with this 3 strikes rule. We can expect nothing from this governmental system, no matter who's sitting in the White House. Because we understand, even though we may have a new president, the last 8 years have not been a crystal stair for black people in this country. It has continued on the same vein because the system is not broken. It is working exactly like it's supposed to work, which is keeping the black body and the brown bodies in a state where we are being constantly disrupted. We are not fine. 35% of black children between the grades of 7 through 12 have been suspended or expelled at some point in their school careers. That's compared to only 15% of white children in this country. For black men, you think about the staggering figures. 29% of black male high school dropouts between the ages of 20 and 24 were institutionalized in 2014. We have more black male high school dropouts in prison than we do who have a job.
2014, we realized in looking at the figures that a black man with an MD in this country comes out making less money than a white man who came out of prison. That is not fine. That is a problem that stems to the root of who we are. We have at this time approximately, we have 13% of the population. Out of that 13%, we're talking only into 150,000 black folks who have a master's degree. And out of that number, we only have 139,000 black people in this country who have PhDs or medical degrees. That is not fine. That should be alarming. That should keep you up at night. That should make you very upset. If we drill down a little bit deeper into Baltimore City, it was during the 1990s in this city that they made the decision to put police officers into the school who did not operate under the Baltimore City Police Department. These police officers treated behavioral disruptions as crimes, arresting students for fighting in school, arresting students for threatening each other on the playground, things like, I'm going to get you after school. I heard that all my life. Or meet me at 12, something's going down. I heard that all my life. But if I was in Baltimore City, that's an arrestable offense. Some of these cases are waived, and some of them continue on through the system. In so many ways, brothers and sisters, this is not fine. This is not okay. So what does this mean? I've placed a handout on your table, and I'll just very quickly, if you will indulge me, I have 5 minutes left. I've never been known to talk very quickly, but I will today go through those things. I think we need two approaches. We need a top-down approach, which is about policy changes, and then we need a ground-up approach coming from the community and the family. So from the top down, I believe that principals and teachers should work to create and maintain positive climates. Building these on the tenets of culturally responsive instruction. Focus on meeting the needs of the students in your building. I believe we need to take ownership for what our students are doing. Recognize that they're suffering from trauma and be active and proactive in trying to help them through this. I also believe, number two, that working alongside teachers and parents and child psychologists, school systems should develop and implement very clear, very appropriate, and very consistent expectations for student behavior. And talk about what those consequences are. Are there ways that we can solve these issues without putting handcuffs on our babies? Is there a way that we can get involved without having to go to the next level? And third, I think that students should have culturally competent psychologists and counselors in the building. That when you're suffering from trauma, when you've seen your friends, as Dr. Bundley said, gunned down last night, it is hard to think about reading and writing and math the next day. You have been traumatized. You need counselors. They need to be in the building. And if you flip over very quickly to the back, this is what I call my ground-up approach. And I think very deeply about this. I don't call myself the Black Mommy Activist because I think it's cute. I call myself that because I decided that when my sons were born, we were going to war. And the only ones who were going to be standing if I had my way, I was to make sure that my boys would survive. That my job is to run before them, take all the bumps and bruises, take whatever the system is giving to me to make sure that they make it. So very quickly, a couple things that I think we should do, and I note at the top kind of what our methodology is for raising our boys alongside my husband. I believe that when we raise black boys, as parents, we have to get inside of them. We have to coax manhood from them. We have to spark their genius, and we have to be the ones to remind them over and over again of their brilliance. We have to tell them that they're going to be something because the world will tell them and show them and remind them over and over and over again that your next step is the prison. We have a room waiting for you. So what I do with that, and these are some of my tips. One, we do intentional listening and actively responding. Learning how to ask the right questions at the right time. Who are the role models that my boys are looking at? Because those role models are the ones who have the final say in their life. When I send them to school, who is determining their behavior in the classroom? Because so many times it's not me or the teacher. So who are they listening to? Second, learning how to say no and when to say yes. I believe we set boundaries for our children and we teach them how to negotiate for more. When my son brought home a C, I said, this is what I want you to do. Go back to the teacher. because she's reasonable, and you say you received a C, see how you can negotiate for a B. Anything's on the table. Just ask her. He went back, he said, can I negotiate for a B? She said, sure, do some more work. He said, well, since we're talking, can I get an A? Is it possible that we can keep negotiating? But the idea is teaching them early on how to negotiate and expect more. You don't have to take every grade or every crumb they're giving you just because you're hungry. You can demand more because you're worth it. Third, I say, is that we have to cultivate a race-brave spirit and outlook. We have to have the talk with our children. And not to talk in some households about safe sex and choosing good partners. We got to talk about what to do when the cops stop you. Where do you put your hands when they pull you over on the street? When stuff breaks out on the playground, where should you be moving? That's about cultivating a race-brave spirit. We got to pepper their room with pictures of people who look like them so they can see themselves up on the wall. I remember my son 2 years ago, he met the mayor. This is, the old mayor, not our new mayor. He walked up to her with a pencil and a piece of paper. She goes, oh, do you want my autograph? He says, no, I thought you wanted mine. I said, see, that's the boy I'm raising. Be ready to give the autograph because you don't know who you're going to be. Expect yourself to be there somewhere else. You have the ability to dream yourself somewhere else. Do the hard work now so you can enjoy the rewards later. And then finally, which I think is very important, is manhood training for the 21st century. My research, as you can probably guess, focuses on black males. Teaching them reflection skills, teaching them life skills, teaching them relationship skills, modeling for them what it means to be both an advocate and an ally. I close for you by just sharing one last story with you. When my sons were 4 and 5, they met Dr. Freeman Rabowski at UMBC. And he told them that he had never seen a black doctor in his life, but he knew he wanted to be one. He said he wrote his name, Dr. Rabowski, and put it up on the mirror in the bathroom. And he said every morning he woke up and he would say, good morning, Dr. Rabowski, every single morning from the age of 13. And he said he cried on that day after he got his PhD. And as a black man, he walked around campus. People said, good morning, Dr. Rabowski. He said he took the sign down, folded it up, and said he put it away for his son one day so he can dream. I woke up the next morning with my 4 and 5-year-old, and they're drawing on paper, and they're writing out Dr. Whitehead, and they're saying to each other, good morning, Dr. Whitehead, good morning, Dr. Whitehead. They were 4 and 5. If you meet my boys today, and some of you have, at 16 and 14, they still greet each other every single morning. Good morning, Dr. Whitehead. How can we change the world today? Thank you.
What I'm going to try to do is really bring home some ideas from the work that I've been doing as Executive Director of Equity and Cultural Proficiency in Baltimore County Public Schools for the past 4 years. Let me be clear that under the leadership of our superintendent, we have been courageously and boldly having conversations about institutional racism in Baltimore County Public Schools for the past 4 years. And so what that has looked like for us is from the school board to the superintendent himself, to his cabinet, his direct staff, people who supervise schools, and now people who work in schools, we have been pulling individuals together and talking about the impact of race on teaching and learning. We've been talking about the impact of race on policy decisions. We've been challenging ourselves to question the very essence of what we do every day as we make determinations about what is appropriate and what is indeed in the best interest of kids. And so the first thing that I want to start with is by suggesting that the idea that we could reroute the school to prison to a pipeline is a fallacy in and of itself. The pipeline must be dismantled. But folk need to recognize that the pipeline is indeed real. And so the way that systemic racism plays out in a really simplistic way, it can be viewed through 2 lenses. That which is material, and we can talk about that in terms of the schooling process using outcomes and metrics, right? So where are our kids in terms of their placement in special education? Where are our kids in terms of reading achievement? Where are they in terms of graduation rates? In the context of schooling, we have plenty of evidence, material evidence that suggests that there's a system of racial hierarchy that puts black children at the bottom rungs. But what drives those material outcomes is a fundamental ideology that is infrequently examined, right? And part of the ways in which conversations around race and racism get proffered are inappropriate and not sufficient to really move us in the direction of systemic change and transformation that I would submit that we need. And so I want to use a series of quotes to sort of illustrate this point that I would like to leave with you. So the first quote I want to offer is from W.E.B. Du Bois: "A system cannot fail those that it was never designed to protect." So let's be clear that one of the reasons why we have the challenges that we have with black children in schooling is because the system was never designed to educate black children. Okay, that is a fundamental reality. And so when people talk about the system is broken, we need to push back on that idea. Because if something is broken, I work harder to repair it. And what actually needs to happen is that the system needs to be transformed. And what needs to be at the center of that transformation are the kids in which we serve today. So what does it mean to educate black children? What does it mean to teach them? What does it mean to be in relationship with their families in the communities? What does it mean to make decisions that support their learning? We have to ask those questions specifically with our children in mind if we even have a hope of coming away with an answer that is responsive to their learning needs. And not only is there not a recognition that there is indeed a thing, right, around centering the learning needs of black students, they are marginalized so greatly within our system, we don't even see the ways in which they get abused, right, in a psychological way when we're walking into and out of classrooms on a day-to-day basis. So what does that look like? What does it look like to put a black child on the school-to-prison pipeline? Do you notice when you walk in that pre-K classroom that the black boy is pulled out and he's not in mat time? Do you notice that by grade 2, that child is not reading at grade level, and therefore he is now on the pipeline, or she is now on the pipeline for special education? Do you notice that when he or she gets placed in special education for services that are supposed to repair some academic need, he or she never exits? Do we even ask any questions about that? Do we recognize that oftentimes what starts off as a cognitive issue then gets scaled up to a behavioral issue, and now the kid is experiencing multiple suspensions, which then places him and her more at risk of being expelled from school, which now he or she is in an alternative placement, and alternative placements are not about college readiness. And so this is how it plays out on a day-to-day basis in the lives of black children. And this is not a question of a broken system. To Dr. Whitehead's point, it is functioning exactly as it is designed. And it does not take malintent for it to function that way. And so one of the things that I have learned in doing the training that we have been doing over the past 4 years is that the bad actors, the boogeymen that we're all waiting for, they're typically not there. But what you have is a series of individuals who are well-intentioned but unconscious. And they're unconscious because we suggest that we live in a colorblind society. We're post-Rachel, and I said post-Rachel. Race doesn't matter. I need to treat all of my kids the same. All of these ideological ways in which we are approaching schooling that further marginalizes an already marginalized population. The second quote that I would like to advance for your consideration is one that is attributed to Harriet Tubman, and it reads as thus: "I freed 1,000 slaves. I would have freed 1,000 more if they knew they were slaves." Now, this is where we come in this room. Too often when we're talking about racism, we're talking about white supremacy, and we ought to be talking about white supremacy. But here's the thing: domination can't exist without subordination. So the real question is, how is your back bent over? Balancing supremacy. In what ways are we making choices that accommodate the subordination of our kids? Again, not because there is malintent, but because we're not doing our own personal work to figure out the ways in which we have internalized things that are fundamentally harmful to our children, to our communities, to our families. Things that maybe at one time were adaptive for survival in our society, that are no longer adaptive. So while I don't, take exception with anybody who wants to have a conversation with a black child about what you do when you get pulled over by the police. I have a 8-month-old African-American boy, and certainly thinking about all of those things are very present. While I'm having that conversation with him, I want him to see me out there fighting the fight to make sure that that system does not exist, right? And because what our kids take from all of these lessons about survival is how to get low. And that's what I see in the greatest, among the greatest of our students. They are brilliant. They are bound for all kinds of genius. But the lessons that they consistently get is about how to get low. And so when I walk into a school, when we walk into schools and we're delivering services or we're a part of the support network, what questions do we ask about what is the pipeline that this school has their kids mapped to? See, we talk about the school to prison pipeline, but when do we demand that our elementary schools have a school to Harvard pipeline or school to Howard pipeline? I'm sorry, that's where I was going with that. When do we demand that, right? And when do we take exception to the idea that all black spaces can't be spaces of excellence? Right now, Morgan is graduating doctoral students. They're all black. It's all black everything. So all of this conversation around we need to figure out how to integrate spaces, there is nothing wrong inherently with an integrated space, but it's not an elixir. Sitting black kids next to white kids is not going to inherently make them better academicians, because the real problem is institutional racism. So we send them into these schools that are getting better outcomes, but we're not asking the question, why? Because somewhere deep inside, we actually believe that white is right. We believe that it is better. We believe that they are smarter. And here again, this is not a question of beating up folks who are day-to-day trying to manage in a system of oppression, but it's actually calling us to the work, the hard work of figuring out how that stuff has seeped in us, how it is embodying us, and therefore how we are colonizing our kids, suggesting to them that all of the possibilities have been exhausted and the best thing they can do is get low and survive. The next thing I would like to offer, the next quote I would like to offer is one by James Baldwin that I use frequently, and that is, if I love you, I have to make you conscious of what you don't see. And again, in my work, one of the things that is plainly clear to me is that externalization of the problems in public education, it is the children, it is the families, it is everybody but what it is that we're actually doing. It is everybody who is contributing to the problem, who is exacerbating the problem, except us who are direct players. We are the system. And so the moment in which we transform, the moment in which we do the adaptive work of stepping outside of our own experience and not creating this, well, things were so much better back in, no, they weren't better. They absolutely weren't better. This is why we keep having the same cycle of problem. Until we dare to envision and reimagine what it could look like in public schools to have our kids thriving and not just in certain communities, right? And literally cause the structure of our work to be centered around the outcome of our imagination, things won't change. And it is very clear, we must be very clear that there is a Pygmalion effect that is happening in public education right now with our kids of color. So, with our black kids specifically. So it is true that we are ill-equipped to be in relationship with them both academically, social, and emotionally. But when we are not in relationship with our students, our young people, they are going to pick up, because they have no way not to, all of the messages that are out there in the ether. And so I often say to folks, you want the best, you allege to want the best of black kids in the classroom. But what are you doing to counteract messages that suggest that their highest level abilities won't be expressed in the classroom? The pictures that were shown by Dr. Newton, those abound. Love and hip hop is the way that I construct my sense of what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a man. And that doesn't have anything to do with being academically gifted or smart. And so having those conversations, not just in the homes, but requiring our staff to have those conversations is important. You know why? Because white kids are getting affirmed like that every day. And that is in part why those outcomes happen. because the social emotional highly impacts teaching and learning. And so I'm going to conclude with a few ideas because I've been given the 1 minute sign. We are the work, right? Every time I go have a conversation, people are like, give us strategies. Okay, the strategy is start doing you. Start analyzing the way that you are thinking about things. You are engaging your kids. When do you shut them down? When do you give them permission to be full human beings? We are the work. Secondly, how do we demand that black children are centered when we are alleging or purporting to provide them services? How do we demand that we are not just making these generating these abstract ideas that have no real life implications in the lives of children and communities and calling that service? How do we force the conversation? And thirdly, our public dollars go to public schools. So we need to demand that those dollars are supporting our children. Last, I want to leave you with a quote that I first heard in reading Dr. Francis Cress Wellesley's work, but I know now that it is a statement from Dr. Neely Fuller. And that is, if you don't understand racism, white supremacy, everything else you think you understand will only confuse you. It is very clear in my work that racism, white supremacy, and internalized subordination is playing out in classrooms. And so that is the major contributing factor to the underperformance and underachievement of black children. But it can be changed because just like we have underperformance, we have brilliance that we don't even see because the system suggests that it doesn't exist. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm out of your way for too much.
Okay, so can we have another hand for all of our presenters? Dr. Bundley wanted to give his 3 takeaways. I think people got the takeaways from yours, I believe, but then you can ask, well, what are your takeaways? So Dr. Bundley is going to.
3 takeaways. The first one, again, I like the act that what Ms. Williams said in terms of, or Dr. Williams in terms of this whole idea of, if you heard, she's talking about demand, fight. We ready, you got to put in some work. It's time to put in work. But if we're going to make the difference in the lives of children, you have to be in proximity to them, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is this whole idea, and my sister here and I are not in opposition to each other. When I say that the children are fine, they are fine. Our guidance is lacking. Our children sell drugs, but they don't own the drug trade. They don't have boats, planes, and trains parked in their driveway. When you look at our children are violent, but they don't own violence. Violence was committed against them first. So we don't own violence. So that whole idea of putting in work, that's what it is. Bobby Wright, Dr. Bobby Wright, may rest in peace, he said, listen, the reason that racism and white supremacy was built because white folk thought about it every day. So in order to counter that, you got to think about freedom every day and work at it every day and fight every day, right? Our children are selling drugs. They don't want to sell drugs, but if they're in their space, nobody is giving them information that helps to move them beyond that. That's what they're going to do. I'm not even going to say I did, but I did. Then the last thing I want to say is this pathway piece. I was able to see my way forward because through that quality connected relationship, Alice Ebb helped me to believe that I could be somebody. And she stayed with me every day. And so we can't blame if a child doesn't have a mama or a daddy. I understand that. But they say in law, in loco parentes. So on location, you the parent. Right? So those are my 3.
Okay, no, I think I was very clear with my takeaways, and I think this on the handout Feel free to follow up with me if you want to talk more or go in more detail about what that actually looks like in everyday life. And I will say one thing that I don't think was raised, this notion of self-care. Yes, we do the work. Yes, it's hard work. But I think we also have to sit back, love, laugh, enjoy our kids, and understand that we have one life to live. If I spend my whole life fighting, and at the end all they can put on my tombstone, she fought hard, I want a little bit more than that. She also laughed just as hard.
Are there any questions? Thank you. So my question is, when we talk about how our children are impacted in whatever area it's in, health, education, right? If we approach examining our students utilizing the same tools, then it's only going to give us the same result. So how can we press against the Psychologists Association, the psychiatric, organizations, the medical profession to take a different approach to our children in every way, in health, in education, in every way?
Yeah, and that question actually speaks to me from the perspective of systemic transformation and the need for systemic transformation, right? And that is the why we took the approach that we did, because the systemic racism with which kids contend with in public schools is not just in the classroom. It's not just about what happens between the teacher and the student. It's about the decision that the administrator makes. It's about the way the cafeteria worker greets the students. It's about how the bus driver works. I mean, we even have data that shows if you live on certain sides of the county, you are notoriously late for school because the buses are always late. And there's a correlation to race and socioeconomic status around those pieces. So the whole argument that I would submit is that there has to be a systemic transformation that puts black children in the center, and that challenges us to draw on the wisdom of black scholars to inform us as to what the practice ought to look like. And until we do that, you are absolutely right. We're going to use tools that give us very predictable outcomes. We will take very predictable actions, and the cycle continues to perpetuate itself.
In case somebody wants to ask another question, I'll just stand with you. Yes, ma'am, in the back. You can walk towards him, too.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. This one is to Dr. Williams. I'm in Baltimore County Public Schools, and I do one-on-one. And what I see, the two schools that I have been in, there's no black teachers. There are only white teachers. So to me, what I see, my children are gifted in other areas, but everybody is focused on their behavior, and it's not carrying on very well. I have a child that destroys the whole classroom, but people are looking at that behavior, not what he knows. And right now, I just got him, so it's like I'm learning him. And I see it, and I was like, why the teachers don't see this? This child is asking for help, from us as adults. And nobody sees that because they see his behavior, what he does, how he destroys the classroom. I think, and I'm gonna be very honest, I think if they had more African-American teachers in those schools, we wouldn't have those problems with our children the way we're having it. And to me, our children are crying out and asking, why don't y'all adults see what we see? And they're very smart. I have another student, he's gifted in piano. And the music teacher says she can't say nothing because nobody's going to listen to her. But he has a behavior, he walks on the desk. And everybody looks at that. They're not looking at his genius. So how can I collate this to how can I help my students that I work with?
So I'm going to answer that question in two ways. So white culture and black culture, like those are real things. And so one of the reasons why white people who have not had training around development of cultural competence can't recognize the giftedness in black children is because they don't know very much about black culture. So if black children don't show up in certain ways, they are very easily overlooked. And that is part of the work that we do around building capacity to be in relationship with people you're supposed to serve. The fact that we have so many white staff members, and it's not just teachers, it's across the whole organization, is a material manifestation of white supremacy and racism in our district. The other part of that, right, is that we all are imbibing the same racial messages. So I need you to hear what I'm about to say. I am not suggesting that we don't need more black teachers, but they need to be conscious. Because if we get black teachers in those spaces that are unconscious, the damage that gets done, that gets reified, is exponential. And too often in environments where there are few black teachers, what happens is we just need black people. We just need black people. Now you gotta think about the kind of black people who are okay with going in those spaces, right? So that brings up a whole nother thing around what it really means in practice to implement a racial equity lens. So we can talk, because there's some things that we could probably work on individually, but those would be my statements to what you just shared.
Jonathan, last question. This young lady, can you walk to him?
Where is she at?
Last question.
Oh, okay.
Hi, it's not a question, it's a statement to
Okay.
what you were just saying. I was a mental health therapist in a school that's predominantly African-American teachers at the black school, and I had to teach my children just how to survive that system. I had to teach them how to survive those teachers. I had to teach them how to survive the principal. I had to teach them how to survive those hall monitors that were like mini cops that they put in the halls. I understand, you know, the behavioral issues, but I had to, a lot of what I did, a lot of my work, I had to spend a 45-minute session. 20 minutes of it was, okay, how are we gonna get through this? How are we gonna survive today? So, black teacher, white teacher, don't matter.